Daniel chapter 11, Kings and Kingdoms. As we were mentioning, chapter 10 to 12 would represent the final vision of Daniel, and it would extend to 3 chapters, and it would furnish for us details concerning the Grecian Empire during the intertestamental period. And we have seen in chapter 10 the conflict in the spiritual realm, the unseen world. And here now we are given that movement, that transition from the Persian Empire to the Grecian Empire. And the Grecian Empire that would come was recorded for Daniel's benefit and for him to share concerning what it will be, the future for God's people. And the history spans from 300 to 150 BC. We have in our text the transition, the Persian kings and kingdom, the Grecian king and kingdom, verse 1 to 2, and verse 3 to 20. We see Alexander the Great, and then we see the 4 generals of Alexander, the Seleucids in the north, the northern kings, and the Ptolemies in the south. In our text from verse 5 to verse 20, on this first part of chapter 11. And then there is a portion that describes the second part of chapter 11. And in the second part of chapter 11, we are going to see the movement from the Antichrist prefigure to the Antichrist himself. If you can see the slide here, you'll be able to notice here the kings of the north and the kings of the south. That is the Grecian Empire, 2 kings from the 2 generals of Alexander the Great, and the 2 kings, 2 other kings in the south, the 2 other generals from Alexander the Great, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies are the names of the 2. And then from verse 21 to 35, there will be a man that would come forth that would desecrate the second temple of the Jews that was built. He would sacrifice a pig in the temple itself, and his name is called Antiochus Epiphanes, and it's a prefiguring of the Antichrist. And that's up to verse 35. And then there is a time gap from verse 35 to from verse 36 to verse 45. Is a description of the Antichrist that would come during the 70th week of Daniel. You remember, we were told that in Daniel 9, verse 27, before we ended chapter 9, that there will be someone that would come, that would break the peace treaty with Israel at the midpoint of the last 7 years, the 70th week of Daniel's prophecy, during the time of the Great Tribulation. So you see here, in between this gap is the time frame for Christ's first coming and Christ's second coming. So you would notice that in the figure that we saw in chapter 9, in which we mentioned concerning Israel's return to the land, how, maybe I show you the picture. Their return to the land. From 445 BC, the decree would be given to build the temple. And when the temple is completed, there will be 434 years before the coming of Christ and his incarceration on the cross. He was cut off. So here is given that period of time of Daniel's 70 weeks, or 70 times 7 years, of which we were told that there is that last week in which the desecration would take place, right, by the Antichrist. So here in chapter 11 is given to us that transition period before coming of Christ, whereby the Grecian ruler Antiochus Epiphanes would desecrate the second temple. Okay, so this is our figure here. You see the figure there? Antiochus Epiphanes. All right, so Christ's first coming, Christ's second coming. His second coming will be at the time when the Antichrist would appear. Right? He would come and he would defeat the Antichrist and his army in the battle of Armageddon. You see there the battle of Armageddon. At the end of the tribulation period, Christ will come and defeat the Antichrist and its army in that final battle. So the Lord wants us to put all these things together. And you need the background of the Old Testament in order to be able to see what is revealed in the New Testament, to put the picture together. So we are attempting to help us put together that picture. All right? So verse 1 to 2 gives to us the Persian kings and their rulership. This is a picture of the transition from the Persian kings, from the Persian dynasty to Alexander the Great. Right? And the dates are given there, from 529 all the way down to 331 and then 333. At the Battle of Issus, Darius III was defeated by Alexander the Great. So that begins the transition from the kingdom of the Medo-Persians to the Grecian kingdom. Verse 1 to 2, it says here, "And I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him, and now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be richer than they all. By his strength and through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia." So there is that transition that the Lord wants us to see. There, right, in verse 1 and 2, all the way from the kings of Persia to the kingdom of the Grecians. And chapter 3, or verse 3, will tell us concerning what happens after the death of Darius III. Alexander the Great of Macedonia would rampage eastward, reaching the Indus River at the age of 32. Alexander conquered Persia. And we are told also in verse 3 of the crumbling of the Grecian Empire. You remember, he's that leopard with the 4 wings, very fast, in conquest. And so, but he died soon after as a drunkard. And his empire crumbled, and they were divided among 4 of his generals. These are the 4 generals: Ptolemy, Antipater, Lysimachus, and Seleucus. 4 of them. So verse 3 onwards to verse 20 will be a description of the Grecian kingdom. And verse 3 concerning Alexander the Great, which we saw earlier in the other slide. "And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will." That's Alexander the Great. Verse 3. And these kings will continue all the way in the description until verse 20. the various kings that would come from after Alexander the Great. Verse 4 tells us that there will be 4 generals of Alexander that would take over the empire. Verse 4, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. So this was the prophecy that was given to Daniel concerning what will happen to the Alexander the Great in the Grecian Empire. And so you see that transition there. This slide provides you another view which we have made up of that movement from verse 2. After the death of Cyrus, the kings that would come. And verse 3, in more detail, what happened? Xerxes spent 4 years gathering an army of 2.5 million soldiers from 40 nations to conquer Greece. At the Battle of Salamis in 480 BC, his fleet was ruined and his army defeated at Plati in 479 BC. He is the Ahasuerus of Esther 1 verse 1. And then followed by a line of Persian kings. Last of it was Darius III, which we saw earlier, and was defeated by Alexander the Great at the Battle of Issus. And then came the Grecian Empire. So I'm going into a little bit more detail. That's history. Okay, God gave to Daniel what is going to happen. And I'm filling in for you the historical records to show what took place. Right. Verse 3 tells of the Greek counter-attack 150 years later after the Great Persian expedition. After the death of Darius III, Alexander the Great of Macedonia rampaged eastward, reaching Indus, and at the age of 32 conquered Persia. At the prime of his life, after a night of feasting and drinking, Alexander fell ill. Within 11 days, he was dead. So some details about this man. And his empire was broken into 4. The crumbling of the empire was divided among 4 of the generals. And the latter part of verse 4 was fulfilled in a literal sense. Within 15 years of Alexander's death, every member of his family had been killed. No part of his empire remained in the hands of anyone related to him, nor did the ruler of any part exercise power at all comparable to that which Alexander wielded. Chapter 5, or verse 5, speaks of the transition. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. So, here you see the generals. Seleucus ruled over Syria, which is up north of Israel, and Ptolemy ruled over Egypt, which is the south of Israel. So that's the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of the Grecians. From this point, the vision concerns these two kingdoms. So until verse 20, it's described these two kingdoms. The two of the four kingdoms having the most direct bearing on the land and the people of Israel. So they were squeezed between these two empires, right? The empire of one of the generals in the north and another empire in the south. So Daniel is given the picture of what will happen to his people many, many years later. The transition from the Persian to the Grecian Empire. So Palestine was held by the Ptolemies for more than a century and then was taken from them by the Seleucids. So the north and the south, right, it was taken over. It was taken by the south and then by the north. The king of the south will become strong, but one of his commanders, Seleucus, will become even stronger than he, and he will rule his own kingdom with greater power. Within 30 years after the founding of his dynasty, Seleucus the first was reigning over a mammoth empire from Punjab, which is India, to the Hellespont. This is virtually the whole of Alexander's empire except Egypt. So this was the development here in verse 5. Just to help us to see further, this is another chart that tells us from chapter 5 onwards, of verse 5 onwards, these are the kings that would come out of it. Right? Verse 6, verse 7 to 9, verse 10 to 11, verse 13, verse 15 to 19, verse 20, verse 21. Who are the kings in the north? The Seleucids. And who are the kings in the south? That is described here from verse 5 to verse 6, verse 7 to 8, 11 to 12, 17 to 25. Of course, there is great detail that is given in verse 6, and for as much as we can cover in this, we would be able to see those things that took place. And in the end of the years, they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. So God went into that kind of a detail to tell Daniel what happened. Okay. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengtheneth her in these times. So there will be a political marriage that is described from verse 6 to verse 9. And it's a prophecy of a daughter of the king of the south who makes an alliance with the king of the north, but who is unable to retain her place and is handed over together with those who supported her. This woman's name was Bernice in history. She was the daughter of Ptolemy II, not the first Ptolemy, who assumed the rule of Egypt after Alexander's death. And she married Antiochus Theos of Syria, who banished his first wife, Laodicea. And after 2 years, Laodicea was restored by Antiochus, but poisoned him and killed Bernice's sons and killed Bernice in the temple at Daphne. And Bernice's father also died soon after. So this was the intrigue that is going on, that Daniel was given concerning what would take place after. And his son shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. Seleucus the second's son, Seleucus the third, sometimes called the Soter or Carunus, succeeded his father upon his death in 227 BC. However, Seleucus III himself died not many years later in 223 BC, and his brother Antiochus III the Great became king of the north. So here is a development that is given to us, and verse 10 says, "But his sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces and certainly come to overflow." Well, both of these sons of Seleucus II had sought to restore Syria's glory. Seleucus III invaded Asia Minor, and later Antiochus III attacked Egypt. Though Antiochus III did not defeat Egypt, he was successful in gaining control of Israel during his campaign of 219 to 217 BC. Egypt's northern border had until then been Syria, but Antiochus III drove the Egyptians, then led by Ptolemy IV, back to the south borders of Israel. He earned the epithet, the Great, because of his military successes. So that is the development that is going on here. "And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, with anger, with hatred, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand." In an attempt to recapture his territory to the north, Ptolemy IV, Philopater, attacked Antiochus III on the south borders of Israel, specifically at Raphia in 217 BC. Initially, he was successful, but later on, Antiochus lost his entire army and was almost captured as he fled to the desert. What am I speaking about? Well, we are saying here that God knows what is going on in the future. Who is going to come after that? Who is that person? What's his name? What is he going to do? Everything the Lord has planned already before. God knows what's going on. And God wants us to see, and God wants us to understand here what it is that He is the one that controls the future. He is the one that knows all things. We may not be able to understand. And when He had taken away the multitude, His heart shall be lifted up, and He shall cast down many 10,000s, and shall not be strengthened by it. Ptolemy the fourth was proud and did not pursue his advantage, even though he killed many Syrians. He did acquire all of Palestine, however. Verse 13. "For the king of the north shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches." And so what happened was Antiochus II then proceeded to turn in other directions for conquest, and specifically to the east and to the north. In 203 BC, Antiochus III returned with a much larger army and repulsed the Egyptians, who were then under the rule of the child king called Ptolemy V, Epiphanes. And Antiochus was able to retake Palestine as far as the south of Gaza. So all these names are very familiar. That was the development that took place. And the Macedonians under Philip V of Macedonia and the Jews living in Israel joined Antiochus III in opposing the Egyptians. And some of the politically zealous Jews believed that they could gain more freedom if Antiochus III succeeded. But this did not happen. The fortified city that Antiochus III besieged and took was Sidon. It's at the coast of Israel, which he defeated about 200 BC. And there he forced the Egyptian general Scopas, whom he had recently defeated at Panias, near the headwaters of the Jordan River, to surrender. And the three other Egyptian commanders tried to free Scopas from Sidon, but they failed. The king of the north in this instance was Seleucus IV Philopator. Antiochus III continued to solidify Syrian control over Palestine without successful opposition from the Egyptians. And when Scopas finally surrendered to Antiochus III at Sidon, the Holy Land was permanently acquired by Antiochus, the Syrian or Antioch government, to the exclusion of Egypt. So there was that battle, that tension between the north and the south, and when they fight, Israel was affected. They are right in the middle. Right? This is what was the description during the intertestamental period before Christ's coming. And Antiochus III, under the threat from Rome, initiated peace with Egypt and offered his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy V in marriage to cement their alliance. And he hoped that Cleopatra would remain pro-Syrian and her loyalty to him would give him control over Egypt. But this attempt failed. Cleopatra consistently sided with her husband against her father, even though Ptolemy V was then only a boy. So you see the intrigue that was going on, how the Lord is able to show us and help us to see what is to come. Antiochus III returned to Antioch, where he died a year later. He had tried to unite Alexander the Great's empire under his own authority, but he failed largely because he underestimated the power of the rising Roman Empire. So there is the Roman Empire that is coming up at that time. Nevertheless, Antiochus III, the Great, was a brilliant and successful military leader. Antiochus III then turned his attention to the Aegean coast and sought to conquer Asia Minor and Greece. He had been contemptuous of Roman authority in Greece and had said that the Romans had no business there. Antiochus did not succeed completely because of a Roman commander named Claudius Clipio. Resisted him effectively. He is the commander that fulfilled the prophecy of this verse. Antiochus III then returned to Antioch, where he died a year later. He tried to reunite Alexander the Great's empire under his own authority, but he failed. Antiochus' eldest son, Seleucus IV, succeeded his father. He taxed his people, including the Jews, so heavily to pay Rome for his Jewish tax collector, Heliodorus, poisoned him. And Heliodorus was evidently the oppressor that Seleucus sent through the jewel of his kingdom, namely Israel, collecting taxes. This assassination set the stage for the terrible persecution of the Jews that would follow. Thus, Seleucus did not die because of mob violence, as his father had, or in battle, but from poison, as this verse predicted. So the verse says, "Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle." And so from verse 5 to 21, you will see that transition, that movement. Which I've gone through. then from verse 21 to 35, we are given a description of Antiochus Epiphanes. He would be a precursor, prefigure of the Antichrist before the coming of Christ. From verse 21 to verse 35. In chapter 8 and verse 9 is described for us that two men stood out in human history that the divine spirit brought to Daniel's attention in this last vision given to Daniel at the close of Daniel's life. The first is Antiochus Epiphanes, who is infamous for his devastating attack upon the people of God and their worship of Israel's God. Daniel was told that about the little horn of chapter 8, and one who foreshadows the Antichrist. The little horn is none other than Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes, who was there 175 to 163 BC, the younger son of Antiochus the Great. 15 verses are here dedicated to this man, the detestable man, the ravages of the great conflict that flowed back and forth over the land of Palestine, paved the way for the rise of this prince. His life and activities are typical of the Antichrist in the end times. And so when you study Antiochus, you'll be able to see a picture of how the Antichrist will appear and will come. And out of them came forth a little horn, which waxed great toward the south and towards the east, and towards the pleasant country, pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, and an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground. It practiced and prospered. So here, this prefigure of the Antichrist will come out of the third kingdom, the Grecian Empire. And he would be a fifth horn coming out of the four horns that would persecute God's people for 2,300 days, or over 6 years. And out of the third kingdom of the Seleucids will come this little horn. And this is the historical Antiochus Epiphanes, who came to the throne in 175 BC and plundered the Jerusalem temple, desecrating it by offering a pig in sacrifice on that altar. Here the present land refers to Palestine, Israel itself. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. He vented his rage upon the holy city, slaughtering and enslaving more than 80,000 Jews. And the ultimate disaster for Israel involved a systematic desecration of the temple, including the erection of the abomination of desolation, which was a statue of the Olympian god Zeus with the features of Antiochus. Torah scrolls were destroyed, the Sabbath and circumcision was forbidden, swine's flesh forced upon the population, and the official sacrifices abolished. There was a Jewish revolt called the Maccabean Revolt, led by the elderly Matthias and carried on by his son Judas Maccabeus and his sons, which eventually resulted in the spectacular cleansing of the temple in 165 BC. Antiochus' persecution of the Jews lasted for 2,300 days, or 6 years, 4 months, and 20 days. This was the period from 171 BC, when Antiochus started warlike acts against the Jews, to December 25th, 165 BC, when Judas Maccabeus restored the temple for worship. The Jews celebrated the event at Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, when they were rescued from the decree which would have destroyed their souls, as one rabbi would explain. The Maccabean Revolt, spectacular in its early years for dedication to the God of Israel, even unto death, some lost those essential qualities and fell to the Romans in 65 BC. So there is that movement to the Roman Empire that is described. And Antiochus was a striking type of the coming desolator, the Antichrist. Here is described for us this man, Antiochus Epiphanes. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flattery. So he's going to come in not through any war or battle, but peaceably, just as the Antichrist would do. He set a peace treaty in which all agreed that there seemed to be peace, and this was how he brokered that peace. And it was an artificial friendship that was brokered. And here we are told how the covenant was made and the covenant was broken. And verse 23, after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, and he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. So here is described the plundering that would come, what he did. And he would enter peaceably even upon the fattest place of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers, and he shall scatter among them the prey and the spoil and the riches, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. So Antiochus dreams to add Egypt to his kingdom, which was down south, and his invasion was prompted by Egypt's growing animosity against it. Verse 25 and 26. And he stirred up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall stir up to the battle with a great army, great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. So here is described that successful movement that went on, and we shall move on. To verse 30. For the ships of Shittim shall come against him, therefore he shall grieve and return, and shall have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. Here we see the two Ptolemies sought the aid of the Romans, who responded by sending a fleet to engage Antiochus at the siege of Alexandria. Now, what we are saying here is history. But it was a prophecy that was given to Daniel that was taking place, right? And if you were to live at this time, you are able to put these things together and to say that, hey, God told us this, But as we plow through these details, you realize that it takes us so much time, isn't it? Just for me to prepare and go through, it's a tons of time to go through. And you realize that as you look at God's word, there is great depth that God wants us to learn. And I would say that we cannot fully share the depth of it, right, in whatever time that we have available to you. But as much as we can, you realize that these things happen. And there are many things that the Lord wants us to learn, in which we need to devote time, we need to spend time, we need to dig into the scriptures in order to be able to understand what holds concerning the future. And from 36 to 45 is described for us the Antichrist that would come. Here from verse 35 to 36 is that transition. And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge and to do them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So here is given to us a transition at the end of verse 35, and from 36 to 45, the scene would change to describe the Antichrist and the rise of his global dominion. And we are given that profile of this man. And the king shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the father, the God of his fathers, the desire of women. So you see, nor regard any God. So you see a description of the Antichrist here, that he neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his father knew not shall he honor with gold and silver, and with precious stones and pleasant things. Then shall he do in the most strong hosts with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. This was the description given to us earlier in Daniel 8, verses 23 to 25. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully and prosper and practice and destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy shall he cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but shall be broken without hand. That's against Christ himself. So this text tells us that he's a man of fierce countenance. Who is this Antichrist? That he understands dark sentences. His power shall be mighty. He shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper. He shall magnify himself in his heart. He shall by peace destroy many. He shall stand up against the prince of princes. He shall be broken without hand. The Lord says that the Antichrist, in various portions of Scripture, because he lifted up his heart, because his heart was lifted up, and thou hast said that I am a God, I shall sit in the seat of God. 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 4, and behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. Daniel 8 verse 23 and verse 7 and verse 8. Daniel 7 and verse 8. Behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of men, and mouth speaking great things, which intimates that the Antichrist will be possessed of extraordinary intelligence. Third, it is said of this character, with thy wisdom and with thy understanding, thou hast gotten thee riches, and hast gotten gold and silver into thy treasures. Verse 38 of Daniel 11, with reference to Psalm 52 and verse 7. And from verse 36 to verse 39, you would be able to see the Antichrist described as doing according to his will, exalting himself and magnifying himself above all gods, which we have mentioned, speak marvelous things against the God of gods. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor desire of woman, nor regard of any God. And he shall honor the God of forces. He shall honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. And he shall divide the land for gain. So these are the things, clues, that is being given to us. Well, each one of them is itself something to ponder and see how you're able to understand and match those things. And if you were to see Antiochus Epiphanes and what happened in history, you would be able to see in hindsight the Antichrist to come and the world events that is before us, to piece together some of these movements that is going on. So, from verse 40 to verse 45 would be described the mid-tribulation war. And at that time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horses and with many sheep, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. The time of the end put this account at the second half of the Great Tribulation. And according to the immediate context in verse 36, the hymn refers to the Antichrist, the capital A Antichrist, and the Arab and the African nations would initiate the war by attacking Israel. Since the Antichrist has a treaty protection with Israel, this also meant an attack on the Antichrist. And so as part of a pincer move, Russia would also attack Israel. The northern forces come via land and sea, and its land armies would include the use of horses because of the rough terrain between the two nations. And verse 41 says, he shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but this shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. Russia meets this hermeneutical requirement involved in the title, the King of the North. Who is this King of the North that is described here? Well, it's associated with the Seleucid Empire, and here it refers to the Antichrist, not to the King of the North. And thus, the King of the North stormed against him with chariots and horsemen and many ships, and Antichrist is viewed as launching a counter-attack whereby he will enter countries, and this conflict is seen as continuing throughout the last half of the 70th week until the Antichrist comes to supernatural judgment at the Battle of Armageddon. So this last portion here describes the Antichrist entering Palestine from the far north through the countries to get there, and the king of the north rushes southward into Africa so rapidly that he doesn't even take time to conquer the other nations, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, the nations of Jordan and Saudi Arabia. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. The king of the north apparently had no concern for possible flank attacks on his extended lines of communication with his now distant, far distant homeland. For the Antichrist has presumably been killed with the sword of the north, and totally ignoring the alliance with the king of the south, which presumably served as a mechanism for a great pincer attack on the Antichrist. So the king of the north will come and attack the Antichrist. So there's a king of the north also. Right? Not just the Antichrist that will come, but the king of the north is that nation that we may be able to surmise as the nation of Russia. Verse 43. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his stead. Egypt, the king of the south, shall be allied with the oil-rich Arab nations, and thus, in spite of the presence of an impoverished lower class, will be irresistibly to the north, to the king of the north. Having destroyed the king of the south, occupying his Egyptian domain, the king of the north now sends his victorious army westward into Libya and further southward into Ethiopia. So all these nations that are there are a description of what is to come in the near future. But tidings of the great east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas of the glorious holy mountain. Yet shall he come to his end, and none shall help him. So here is a description of the rumors of the enemy armies from the east and from the north that would irritate him, resulting in his killing of many more people. Zechariah 13 verse 8. And compared this with the invasion of Sennacherib. You remember in Isaiah 37 when he tried to take Judah and failed. God sent his angels to destroy them. His headquarters will be in Jerusalem. And here we see that it is evident that he shall meet his match and suffer defeat. What was the defeat? Well, the defeat is the return of Christ from heaven to destroy him. And one writer summarized the revelation about Antichrist in verses 36 to 45 as follows. He says, he will be self-willed, verse 36, and exalt himself, verse 36. He would magnify himself above every god, verse 36, and he would blaspheme the true God, verse 36, for a limited time, and will be an irreligious person, verse 37. He will also place confidence in military might, verse 38 and verse 39. His military might will be challenged, verse 40, and he will be initially victorious in battle, verse 40 to 43. However, he will face renewed conflict, verse 44, and will establish his headquarters in Jerusalem and will finally come to an end. What is significant for us is that we are moving towards the 10 toes of Daniel 2 of the Roman era, nearing the rise of the Antichrist. But the rapture of the church would precede this. The rapture of the church would precede this. Well, this is a picture of what we saw earlier concerning the various rulers of the north and of the south. We shall take a break now.